a few minutes just outlining the approach from the community builders. And I think it's all great that we all have to learn from each other, see what other people are doing, and hopefully that will just really advance the narrative relative to DEI. And so we could go to the next slide, please. So one of the things that I would highly recommend is a DEI purpose statement. And what's on the screen is the TCB purpose statement. And it's really important for every organization really to define your worldview. They're going to be different for every organizations. There will be a different set of core values, a different mission. And I just think it's important for every organization to have, excuse me, a purpose statement that really defines where you are relative to DEI matters. And so what you see on the screen is TCBs. You know, some people will have ones that are less robust, some will have ones that are more robust, but I think it starts to frame the narrative about where your organization is. And it sends the message to the employees that, hey, this is where we stand. Your employees, your team can have input into this purpose statement, but ultimately there's a collective vision that starts to frame how your organization really sees the world, which obviously frames your DEI mission. Next slide, please. I think it's also important if your organization wants to go down the pathway of DEI, really define, you know, why it's important to your organization or why it's not important. But again, just, you know, the goal is to become very self-transparent and try to communicate internally to leaders, to members of your team, why you want to go down this pathway. And one of the things that we did as TCB is we tried to figure out, hey, what are the key reasons why DEI is important to us as TCB? And what's on the screen really is, you know, what we came up with as, you know, some of the more important reasons why we thought this kind of objective was where we wanted to move. Next slide, please. And so when we put together our DEI platform, we really decided we were going to focus on 4 key areas. One, TCB employees. Secondly, was the residents of our communities. Thirdly, was vendor diversity and accountability. And fourth is macro advocacy. And so, you know, employees really wants to look at what we're doing internally, what's our culture for our company, how are, you know, employees being treated, hiring, promotion, opportunity. Let's really look at this and figure out what our game plan is. Secondarily, we wanted to say, what does DEI look like for our residents? A large percentage of our residents are people of color. What can we do relative to their lives to advance their interests? Because the challenges are different. And we recognize that. And we wanted that to be a component of our DEI program. Vendor diversity, I'll talk a little bit more about this as we go through, but this was a very big part of our platform, particularly for development. Development projects are incredibly expensive. They take a lot of money. A lot of people are getting checks from consultants to contractors to attorneys to accountants. What level of accountability do these organizations have? And so we wanted to not only just look at whether our general contractor was hiring you know, 25 or 30% minority subs. But what about the workforce of the general contractor? What about the leadership of that general contractor? What are they doing to expand diversity and equity? And so that really is a key component of our strategy, is not just to have, you know, MBE plumber on the project, but what does the leadership of our architect look like? And how are they advancing DEI matters? And the fourth component really is events such as this, where we want to participate in macro advocacy. We want to certainly share what we're doing internally, but we also want to learn what other organizations are doing. We want to keep this narrative really present on the forefront, so that it's really comfortable for people, just like we talked about rising construction costs that are impacting our industry. We're just as comfortable talking about efforts to expand DEI and what does this look like internally in our industry and for our residents. Next slide. And so every organization, I think, should really define your approach and what are you going to do. And for us, you know, it's really easy with a lot of really intelligent people, creative people, to get too aspirational. And so it was really important for us to kind of focus on a limited number of prioritized but highly achievable. You know, we don't want pie in the sky. We don't want things that are going to take 20 years. We want things that we can do. And, you know, just to hit a couple of these, we also wanted to create a platform where employees can leverage their skills and passions to really advance our initiative, to really have it organic, but also at the ground level, so that everyone feels sufficiently empowered that, hey, here's something I'm passionate about relative to this space. How can I participate? How can I really operate, you know, within that space to advance this objective? And so we came up with kind of some core approaches that we thought were going to guide our efforts through this space. Next slide, please. And this, you know, I just picked a few of the actions taken to date. 2020, we decided as a company that in 2021, Juneteenth would be a permanent holiday for the company. Most people who are in development know that the number of people of color in development is, particularly in affordable housing, is just incredibly small, just minute. And so one of the things we did was try to help in some kind of way with scholarship to advance academic training and skills for, you know, within TCB. A lot of industries have done very well with affinity groups. Our Chicago office did create a Black employee affinity group. I think it may open up to other regions, but it really was an opportunity for the Black employees in Chicago, whether they're in development or property management or community life or finance, just to really aggregate what they were doing. The next one, which is really, you know, came up, was a bit surprising, but we decided to do a racial equity communications audit. I think that if we look at all of our materials, you know, what we found at TCB is we have community engagement and we have architects and facilitators of that engagement. And we just had a lot of pictures of white people standing over Black people, pointing things out. I mean, it really just, you know, we weren't aware of it, but when we just looked at what the pictures were showing in our collateral from that lens, it really was not it's really not what we wanted to see. It looked like there was a group of benevolent people trying to help another group that couldn't help themselves. And so that's, images are important. And so we're undergoing this. And within our intranet site, we've also taken the initiative to try to collect resources, articles, videos, historic facts, just so that there's a repository of data, so that if a person in New York who's leading a team meeting and wants to talk about this, let's have resources available. We're not trying to make everyone an authority on DEI matters, but just let's aggregate resources so that they're at our disposal. Next slide, please. And so one of the things I wanted to spend some time with is our TCB vendor questionnaire. And so what we do now, particularly, we started this with our development group, is that when we send out an RFP for an architect or a general contractor, and we've also expanded this now to go to equity partners and debt partners, we send out a questionnaire. And this first paragraph is really we couldn't put all the questionnaire in readable manner on the screen, but it really talks to who we are as TCB and why we're engaging in this questionnaire. Next slide. And so the first part is we just try to collect some basic data on the company so that we know who we're dealing with from a business perspective. Is it majority minority owned? Yes or no? Is it a percentage minority owned? Is it majority woman owned? Is it a percentage woman owned? So we want to know who owns the company. And so that's the first bit of information that we collect from the vendors we're doing business with. Next slide. And so then we also want to look at our leaders. I tell the story that we were responding to an RFP in Fairfax County and had a general contractor that we work with that's been a fantastic partner, and they sent over their qualifications package to include in that package, and it had pictures of projects and pictures of their leadership. But on their leadership page, there were 11 white men, no people of color, no women, and they were all smiling, looking really, really happy. And maybe they were really happy, but it just sent the wrong message that, hey, we're dealing with a partner that has no minority leadership, has no woman-owned leadership. And so, we want to know what your leadership looks like as an organization. And we also want to know what your employee workforce looks like, number of employees, minority, and women. And next slide, please. And finally, and this one has been really, really helpful for us, is we want to know what your organization is doing relative to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We had an architect that I'm working with in Pittsburgh that sent in a proposal response, and this organizational activities, it was a page long or page and a half, and it was just absolutely fantastic. And they had really put together this incredibly thoughtful programmatic approach to DEI. And what they told me was, hey, no one has ever asked us for this, and we're so elated that we can share this because we've been doing this, we're working on it, but we've never had the opportunity to share it. And it was fantastic. I mean, it was going to HBCU schools to get more, architects in the door. It was going to different, trade associations, but had a really fantastic program to both support kind of the pipeline of architects, but hire architects and participate as an industry player. And so, I certainly learned from that. I think that others can learn. And so that's really the last component that I wanted to hit of our program is our vendor diversity. And certainly after, Brian speaks, I'm happy to engage any questions or discussion.
Thanks so much, Juan. Now we've got, so Carmen has a question. Carmen, should we wait until after Brian? Do you want to, is it a quick?
Oh, no, why don't I can do it after Brian, and that way
Okay.
Have a fuller discussion.
Okay, thanks so much. Brian, welcome.
Hi, and thanks for having me. Look, I will try. I'll try to make sure that there's time for discussion and questions, because I think that's really where we start to maybe unpack this a little bit more. So I'll try to go a little brief, and I'll just start by saying, Juan, that was fantastic. I mean, I think to really not just address the sort of that and rationale behind this, but to talk about practical, real-time things you can do, ways to measure it, putting statistics to this. I mean, I think that is really an amazing blueprint, and I applaud the work you're doing. It's really terrific. So I will just make this a little more conversational, and I'm going to stay a little more elevated in the clouds, because I think I want to just be able to match that with Juan's ability to really describe it on the ground as well. So DEI has been around a long time, right? No surprise, we didn't just start talking about it. I do want to talk about an inflection point, though, which I think was George Floyd. I think that the way we talk about and think about DEI has changed. I think part of the reason it changed is that it really began to allow for an honest conversation about what it means to live in this country and to be different than a majority group in this country. And I'm not sure that we fully understand what life is like for members of different religious groups, members of different gender identity and sexuality, members of different races. I mean, I want to be really genuinely inclusive. I'm not sure men fully get the why walking out at night, and why my wife has a much more difficult time walking the dog at night than I do. I mean, I think there's just some of this is subtle, some of this should just be obvious, but I don't think we really understand each other that well. And I think the world we've been sort of boxing ourselves into since the rise of social media and infinite YouTube channels and TikTok channels is that you can now curate your own world exactly how you want it to look. You can get the news feed that you want. You can get the jokes that you want. You can get the headlines that matter to you and nothing else. And I think the result is that we become even more, in some ways, closed-minded about the other. And I think when you don't know the other, you fear the other. And when you fear the other, there's all kinds of things that start to happen after that. What George Floyd did is I think it really allowed for a moment, and I regret that the word has been racial reckoning. I think reckoning is it's maybe not, it's not the right way to think of it, but I think it's been a moment of racial honesty. And I think in our organization, we use it as an occasion to have real, legit talk about what it means to be Black in this country, and to have people tell folks that they've worked alongside for 10 years how their daily experience is different. And I'm not sure that their colleagues knew just how different that experience was. And then to Juan's point, so what does it matter that maybe we have different experiences? Why do we bring this into the workplace? Why does this become something that has to be a part of our thinking in a professional setting? I don't have one answer for that. I think I will leave that to different companies, because some companies say it doesn't matter. I'm a hedge fund. What do I care? Or I'm working. I don't know, as a lawyer, and I just don't deal with those issues. So our organization doesn't care. So I'm not going to speak about all workplace settings and why these issues of difference matter. But I will say that I do think there's something unique about this field of affordable housing that can't ignore it, that I think needs to be among all industries, among those that embraces it. Because I personally believe at its core, this industry of affordable housing, this field of affordable housing is at some level a conversation about social and racial justice. I think what we're dealing with today is not because of decisions made today. These are intentional decisions that date back for many decades that created a very uneven playing field for different people in our country. I was honored to have a chance to go to Italy and to go to Venice and walk 1.5 miles to get to the first ghetto in the world, which still has the original buildings and a lot of the energy of what it meant to be Jewish at a time in this world when that was a reason to be destroyed just for your religious belief. And I don't think this is unique to America. We talk, read the book Caste. There's this notion of how we separate each other from others is pretty universal. The question becomes, how do we repair that? I think the field of affordable housing at some level is continuing to try to repair the damage and the harm that came about when we created pockets of neighborhoods and pockets of community and life that were very different than what anybody really wanted. I mean, we created decisions where folks were forced to live in really unfair conditions. And so much of the civil rights movement was about trying to call attention to an unfair reality. My grandfather was right there at the Montgomery bus boycott. He was part of the Montgomery Improvement Association. He says he's the one who suggested King be the president. My grandfather was the secretary. But the stories that you read about what was going on at that moment, when there's literally a line of demarcation on a bus that said certain people can't go past this line. And the line was not literally written, it was in the mind of the bus driver. That line moved depending on how many white people were in the bus and how many black people. And that line would move back and back and back until there was only maybe not enough space for black folks to even get on the bus. So that was not so much a question about diversity, equity, inclusion, but diversity, equity, inclusion in today's language is all rooted back in these very clear and obvious things we chose to do in this country in creating differences. It was good. I think when I talk about why all that sort of matters in our field, we are talking about disproportionate income. We're talking about different neighborhoods where we can build affordable housing. We're talking about access to schools that are very different. We're talking about access to medical care that's very different. So when I talk about this as maybe a field that does have to, at some level, harken back to injustice and inequities, I really do believe this field has to be a leader in this world of DEI. And I don't want to make it just about DEI from perspective of black and white. I think it is a fully inclusive notion of what DEI is about. And I think that if we're not leading the parade, then there's something wrong. When we talk about how do you lead that parade, I think it includes who's on your team. And Juan's right, this industry has not been as diverse as you would have thought it would have been, given what I think is its intention and given who I think it largely serves. There's rural communities, it's a big country, we serve a lot of different folks in affordable housing. But in the DC metro region, much of the face of this are immigrant groups, folks who were not born in this country, folks who have been here and are of color. And I think at some level, we got to own that reality and understand why does this population continue to have a very different reality than others? And how do we change it, not just through making a home that's affordable, but through the entire experience of what it means to live in affordable housing, and whether that experience itself continues to be a limiter and a reason for continued inequity. And so I would say that kind of how we have tried to really, at the end of the day, bring all of those words together into a direction within our company, it really is talking about the experience. What is the resident experience we create in this field? And is that experience one that's preparing folks to move forward in life? Or are we unintentionally arresting folks into their zip code and creating a different set of outcomes? And so we are all about the experience. We believe that experience is at its core about being in a home that you can afford, because if you can be in a home you can afford, it opens the door to a lot of other things. In a home where you feel a sense of pride, place, and belonging, those things matter. And then what? Part of this diversity question comes back to social. We often think that, I often believe as well, you can't have a whole lot of economic mobility if you don't have social mobility. If your only social circle are folks who are in the same income track, at the same schools, with the same doctors, and the same set of opportunities, you are, by virtue and definition, somewhat limited in your own movement. So social mobility without economic mobility is a fun question to continue to debate. But when we talk about that mobility, it comes back to, well, who's socially part of our companies, part of our communities, and how are we creating a world where there is opportunities to reach outside of your sometimes too limited bubble. This is I really applaud the fact that we get to have this conversation today. I think this is part of a world where, again, the reality of George Floyd has made it possible to have this conversation today. I've been working 20 plus years, 25 years, and I have not been able to use the word Black in a professional setting for most of those. We skirt over and hide the most obvious truths about our work environment out of, I'm not sure, maybe it's back to fear. So I appreciate, again, the honesty of this moment we're in, the chance to try to talk and raise each other's own awareness, get a little bit better at how we talk about and understand each other, and continue to understand, I think most importantly for this call, what is it we're trying to achieve in this industry? And how do we achieve it? And how does that maybe look a little different than how we've been working in the past? So let me stop there, and I look forward to shifting this from a monologue to a dialogue. So thanks for listening.